What's up, boys and girls? Lambo here, and I'm finally back with another YouTube video. I know it's been quite a while, and I apologize for my absence, but I'm going to be talking about that in an upcoming video, also about my future plans for this channel, and I'm sure that will answer a couple of questions from those who are wondering why I didn't upload. But for today, I have something else planned, because today I want to review the last two Dreamhack seasons with you. I'm sure a lot of you guys have been following the Dreamhacks Masters Summer and Dreamhack Masters Fall. In one of them I had the best run ever, and then in the next one I had my worst run ever. And I will be talking about why and how it comes that I can have such polar opposites performances in such a short time period apart from one another. And I'm going to be very honest with you guys, and I will explain stuff like how big it is to think that you are gonna win for sure and that you should win, and some other differences, and mostly just about the things that went on in my head during these games and after these games, and how I processed all of it and what I thought afterwards. And I'm sure I'm gonna answer a bunch of questions. So let's start with the first Dreamhack season. The first is always the most important. In this case, it started with the Dreamhack Summer. The reason the first is always the most important is because seeding is very, very important. So there's a lot of pressure on here. We also had a massive break. I don't know why the tournament is starting so late, and late May is the first tournament that starts in the year. For everybody that didn't make Katowice especially, which are only 7 people from Europe, right? I was very hyped for it. I was looking forward to it because we haven't played for that long, but there was obviously a massive importance on this performance in this tournament in general. We have these 3 Dreamhacks, and they kind of decide how our entire year goes. This is what we work for. This is what we put all our hours in for. And let's see how it went. So first off, I started in Group D. I think I had the second seed because I was top 8 in the points of the last season. I barely missed Katowice. I was in a group, as always, with Cyril. So we are the top seeds. Cyril won and I was the second seed. And then the other players in my group were Soul, Haristem, Mana, Hellraiser, Sort of, and Art. I thought this was a relatively hard group because there's one top player that is almost invincible in a group stage like that because he's super solid, which is Cyril. And then there are Soul, Haristem, and Mana, which all 3 of them I think are on a very similar level. And always scary, especially in best of 3s where they can prepare for. And then Hellraiser and Sort of, which definitely have an upset potential. And then there is Art, who played from Korea and should be the one, I'm gonna call it the obvious win that you need to get, or that you should get. So that was my group overall. I thought it was a relatively hard group, but I was not too upset about it. One thing that helped me a lot was that I was second seed, and the second seed gets a really sick order of matches every single time. I had to play, I believe, kind of from easy to hard mostly. So I had to play Sort of first and then Art second, which are probably the 2 easiest players, and then Hellraiser third. So those are the 3 easiest players right off the bat. And one thing that I talked about a lot in the past, a lot in interviews especially, is that I'm a very momentum-based player, and confidence is super important for me. And if I start well in a tournament, I feel like I'm playing good. Doesn't matter if my play changes at all, I will just feel better. And this tournament started off great, with me winning 2-0 against Sort of, and then 2-0 against Art, and then 2-0 against Hellraiser, which was kind of expected going into it, but it just felt nice, and it took a lot of pressure off myself, because with that start, even if I lose against all the other guys, the Soul, Haristem, and Mana, they're very good, but they're usually not solid enough to beat everybody else. So if you start like that and maybe take out one of the other guys, you should be mathematically already in the playoffs. But I've never had an issue with that. My goal was always to get top 2. In the last year, I got top 2 twice. I even won a group once, but that was because I had Gape in my group as the 1 seed, which is basically the lottery win in this format, because you don't have to play Cyril, Rainer, or Clem. So that was the one that I won. I actually beat Cyril in one of the group stages and barely got second on map score against him because I lost against Stefano. And then the 3rd time last year, I got top 4, but I would have gotten second if I didn't choke against Stefano on the last on the last group stage day, which was very surprising for me because I have never lost against Stefano my entire life before last year, but that's just how it happened. So either way, this format seemed to be pretty good for me, this preparation-based group stage format. I personally did not like it at all. I think 2 weeks is way too long for this, but I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. I've had troubles mostly last year in the playoffs because of a loss of motivation and kind of burning out, which I adjusted for this tournament. I actually I knew that this was always an issue, and usually I would start preparing very, very hard, maybe 2 or 3 weeks before the tournament starts. And in those weeks, I would basically completely shut myself off from any social activities or anything like that, because I just put everything I have into this game and trying to get good at it and trying to prepare well for these tournaments. And then after these 2 or 3 weeks, I play the group stage for 2 weeks, and even if I do really well in it, by the time the playoffs come, you're kind of burnt out and you don't really want to play as much anymore, and it kind of feels a little bit harsh, but that has nothing to do with the group stage right now, which was just perfect for me. This was actually the thing that I was most proud of, was that I ended up going 12-0. I was the player that was undefeated for the longest in this tournament. I ended up going 12-0, so 2-0 Soul, Hearthstone, Mana, Hellraiser, Sort of, and Art, all consecutively, and none of these matches were close. I do not recall a single map that was close out of all of those games, which never happened to me. I always used to be a player that is a top 8 player in Europe, but at the bottom of that. And the reason for that was very often my inconsistency. But especially over the last half year or so, I got relatively consistent at not losing against worse players anymore. And I felt really, really good about that. That 12-0 gave me insane confidence. Throughout this group stage, I actually also had a Zerg first, and then I had a bunch of Protosses, so I mostly practiced with Protoss throughout that time, which was lucky for me, and then I had a Zerg last again, so I didn't really need to practice all 3 matchups all the time. I had a couple of days straight where I just didn't lose a single custom game against good players, mostly against Protoss, but I had such insane confidence. At this point, if you ask me, I would have gone into an argument with any Let-It expert and told them that my ZVP is actually the best in the world. But yeah, enough of that. I ended up playing the last match against Cyril for the first place, and he kind of read me pretty well, and I ended up in second place, which sucked because the second place finishers are all a lot easier than the first place finishers. But then I ended up getting lucky after all, and I got Hero Marine in the playoffs. And I went into the series with insane confidence levels because of how I played the group stage. Not because of my score, not because I got second, but because of the way that I won those games and them not being close whatsoever. I practiced against Archon actually, some Terran players helped me out, and my games went pretty well. And then the game started against Hero Marine, and he played better than I expected. And he honestly surprised me a little bit with that. We had a very close games. I think I could have won a bunch of them, but he ended up 3-0ing me. It didn't really feel like a 3-0 for me, but I was a little bit surprised. I think that's the best he's ever played against me. I think period. I don't think I ever had him play this good. Also since then. And yeah, I was definitely surprised and a little bit sad because this was my chance to get the top 4 without having to beat one of the top 3. If you don't fuck up ever, you sometimes get this chance at not having to play any of them. If you get Hero Marine basically as a first seed, right? So yeah, it was a little bit unlucky, but not really unlucky. He just played better than me, in all honesty. So I ended up dropping down to the losers bracket, which was really hard as well. It was actually Gung-Fu or Euthermal, and then Showtime, and then Cyril. That was my path into the top 4. And I ended up beating Gung-Fu 3-1. This was a series where I mostly played the early game really well and then ended up getting wins because of it. I also expected a lot of his strategies because he used strategies that I used to lose ladder games against him with. Once, like a year ago or so, I still remember that I lost a ladder game against him when he opened with Mass Oracles. Defended a Queen Walk because it's actually one of those super hard counters to Queen Walk if you open with a fast third Nexus and then you go Mass Oracles. and then you walk over with the queens and the oracles just destroy everything. So I was fairly certain that he was actually gonna bait me into queen walking, so to say, with a Stargate opener into a fast third base, and then that was gonna be mass oracles, and I was actually very, very certain that it was gonna come at one game. I also was very certain that one game he was gonna play Phoenix, and he ended up doing exactly that. So even though Kung Fu can play anything, especially because he doesn't really use build orders, he kind of just freestyles in practice and then makes up stuff by himself. I kind of read him a little bit there, and I ended up getting a good series against him. And then the next day I played against Showtime. Maybe not the next day, maybe it was 2 days later. Either way, I played against Showtime next, and that series actually was the worst I played in the entire tournament. I still had pretty decent confidence, but Showtime plays a style that the other players don't. And he's actually really good against queen walks. And I ended up losing one game with a queen walk against him straight up in the first game, which I think I had Harrison play his opener. And Harrison could not defend my queen walks with that opener, but Showtime could. He barely held, and the game was still pretty close. But I ended up losing the first game on my map pick, and then winning one of the games with a mind game that I thought out at the start of the game. I think I got pretty far ahead because of it, basically faking a swarm host and then going into lurkers really fast, which is good against him because he used to not transition very fast into carriers. I think nowadays he does, but I think you can outmaneuver his style a little bit if he doesn't transition to air. Either way, I then proceeded to lose on Beckett and then win a game on 2000 Atmosphere where I thought I was dead, to be honest. And then I also won after that on Jaga. It felt pretty nice because that was the first player that I beat that actually was in this area of players that I actually want to break into. I think over the last year, as I said before, I'm a top 8 player, but I'm like 7 or 8. I think in Europe it's pretty clear cut who is at which skill level. It's the 3 musketeers, or however you want to call them, 3 wonder kids. It's Rainer, Cyril, and Clem. In any order, really. They all have different strengths and different weaknesses. I think in any order, those 3 are the top 3. And then there is a huge gap. And then it used to be Showtime and Hero Marine, I believe, in that order. But that changed a little bit. I think right now it's Hero Marine, so at this point it was already Hero Marine and then Showtime. And then it would be Elaser, Utherman, and me. Or usually Elaser and me, and then Utherman sometimes if he's really good, and sometimes maybe Mana can break in, who also broke in this year above Utherman and Mana still would be MaxPax. So it would be, this year I would say Elaser, me, and MaxPax. Also in any order really, I think I played worse than Laser last year. I think I play better than Laser this year. And I think MaxPax was below us, but now also is on the same level. And now in his last Dreamhack run, which just happened, he has an even better standing, obviously, because we completely failed Laser and me both. Either way, that's kind of the hierarchy of Europe, so to say, and I want to break into 4th. This is my ultimate goal, because I actually lost complete motivation because the top 3 are just out of reach. I cannot get there because they're just a little bit too fast, and I don't improve quickly enough anymore that I can maybe beat them, maybe one of them at a time, but I can never be as consistently good as Clem, Rainer, or Cyril because they're fundamentally better than me. So I look at the rest, and then my motivation is to be the 4th best in Europe, which is pretty sad, but that's the way life is. So beating Showtime for me was pretty huge, especially on a day where I did not play good. But I knew that I was going to play the loser of Rainer versus Cyril, and I, to be honest, hoped that Rainer was going to lose because Rainer is inconsistent against Zerg, as he does a lot of random shit, which if you absorb it, sometimes you just get free wins, and you can win a ZVZ series very fast. I also just lost 2-0 against Cyril in the group stage, so was not the most confident against him, but that was my next opponent. This is the player I had to beat if I wanted to make it into the season's finals, which I've never done before. In this online format, I always sucked in the playoffs. This was already my best run, even though I just beat 2 players. But this was the best I've got, so at this point I'm top 6, and I play against Cyril. And maybe I'm gonna make an extra video on this, but I don't want this to go for too long. I got a lot of mind games right, and I won a lot of early games basically, and I ended up beating him 3-2. Which meant that I was in the top 4, and I had to play Gabe later that day, who beat the Laser on the other side of the bracket. And by the time I beat Cyril, I think that was the happiest I was from my StarCraft, or from StarCraft in general, since I beat Showtime in Montreal. And, well, since Cyril beat Rainer as well in the finals, because then I knew I was going to BlizzCon. But since then, this is my highlight, because it was a very hard series, and I used all of my strengths, which was basically just my strength. Like, my strengths are pretty much just that I'm strategically pretty good at expecting the correct strategies and trying to counter them. And especially in ZVZ, I come up with new strategies very, very frequently. So I used all of that, and I managed to rob a series of Cyril. That made me feel pretty good. And then I beat Gabe as well afterwards, which felt nice because it's a revenge, and people, when they see the 3-0, they're like, Gabe is he's just better than Lambo. But that's not how StarCraft works at all. You can lose a series 3-0 while being the better player. I hate it when people talk like that, so I was glad I got him in the rematch there. And then I ended up losing the next day, the final day, 2-3 against Rainer, and I'm sure for the guys that saw it, I threw the last game pretty hard. There's no way around that. I had that series won pretty much. So even though I got top 3, I was pretty much just happy for a day, because there was nothing I could think about other than about the missed opportunity that I had to get into a finals. And overall, in that run, that was the best run of my career, and you'd never know if you ever have a run like that again. I think there are international tournaments where everybody plays in that are single elimination that are easier than to get to a win in Europe, and that honestly would have that would have been great. Even just making it in the finals in Europe, I think is almost more difficult than back in the day. It's not almost, it's for sure more difficult than back in the day, like getting into a finals of a Dreamhack, or even sometimes winning it, because back then we didn't have as many players at the top as we do now have of Europe that are competitive at the highest level. It's not even close. Back then it was only Cyril, and then Neep was pretty good, and then the rest was kind of quite a bit below that. But right now with Clem, Rainer, and also Gabe, and the double elimination format where you have to beat one of them twice, most likely, it's pretty rough. So either way, this was the reason I'm saying it's the best run of my career, even though I got like top 3s in international events, is just what I said. I think this format is extremely hard to make upsets happen in, and it's super, super difficult to win this. And I was so close. I was like just one not thrown game away from making it into the finals. But then again, I also could have just lost against Showtime, and no one ever would have talked about that run ever. So I think there's, in the end, looking at it, I think there is a lot of luck involved in StarCraft, which people might not expect, because there is no luck in the game, or there's very limited luck. For example, where you spawn sometimes is lucky. For example, afterwards I played the season finals. After beating Trap, I played against Scarlet in the deciders match for advancing in the group stage, and in the third game I decided to abandon my initial strategy, and I ended up going for a 12 pool. I cancelled the first run I made last second. I was like, okay, whatever, let's just 12 pool. And I only did that because I had the top spawn. If I had the bottom spawn, I would not have done that, and I most likely would have gotten a free win, because Scarlet went for a pool first Link flat. That was a strategy that I don't think is very good against Hatch first, so I ended up getting a hard counter there, and I think that obviously has a little bit to do with luck, but that's not exactly what I meant. I think just having good daily form is very important, and I don't see a way how you can consistently have that. I'm trying my best at finding out how to do it, but it's very, very difficult. And also small things like the order of players that I'm playing against make a huge difference, and that's not up to me. If I play against, let's say I'm playing against Cyril first, I'm starting 0-2, I'm not feeling that great. Now I play Soul second, and I know that if I lose this, most likely I'm not top 2, which I know anyways, even after I'm 10-0, if Soul also has an almost perfect score, just losing to Cyril, I know that I still won't get top 2, but it just feels different. And then if you make one small mistake there in the early game, you might feel worse and you might lose the game because of it. On that level, it happens all the time. And then you might already feel bad for the group stage. And I think this is already a little bit of foreshadowing of what happened in the next Dreamhack. But I think it's very circumstantial how the results work. I think overall, looking at a player's skill is you have to look at you always need to kind of look at the big picture. And I think in this run overall, I got lucky for sure. And I also played the best StarCraft I probably ever played in tournaments, but I think there was a lot of luck involved and a lot of just feeling good about myself and then believing that I'm better and then also actually playing better. But that was just the first part. At that point, after this tournament, I thought, okay, at this point I'm as good as Gabe, and I'm competing for the fourth slot. I still think Gabe is more solid overall because I can lose against worse players. But besides this tournament, I also had insane results in the World Team League. I beat Dark 2-0, Solar 2-0, I beat Stats in an ace match. I beat Trap not only in the season finals, but I also beat him basically 4-2 in the playoffs. And basically I took a lot of top Korean names, but then at the same time I would sometimes drop maps here and there against maybe worse players. Like I would lose a map against Rex, but that doesn't mean that Rex is worse than Dark. It doesn't mean that Rex is worse than Solar. It just means that I'm not as solid against worse players. I think if there was a Hearthstone card with me, it would be... I haven't played Hearthstone in a while, but basically it would give me a offense and defense score, and if I play against top players, it would be amplified. But if I play against players that are... Because I don't get as nervous playing against top players, because I do not think about the consequences of losing as much as I do if I play against players that I really think I should beat. So players that are 500 MMR plus worse than me, I think my score should be halved, at least. I think I play considerably worse against that. And after this tournament, I actually felt like maybe these days are behind me. Maybe I'm actually as good as Gabe and I can just beat the players I'm supposed to beat. Because this was an ability that I did not used to have, and this is probably Gabe's biggest strength. Like, this is the thing that I admire the most about him, is how solid he is. I think Terran helps with it a lot, because you straight up, like, TVZ, for example, Zerg just doesn't have cheese in that matchup. That works. Like, you can just play Banshee every game and beat players that are worse than you, for example. And I'm not sure how volatile the other matchups are compared to Zerg, where ZVZ is very, very volatile, and well, we also have ZVT, which usually the better player wins, and then ZVP, but there's also Proxy Rex, and ZVP, there's also different kinds of bullshit, and Protoss probably is the hardest race to be very, very consistent with, but I think it's also me as a player that just plays worse against worse players. Anyways, I'm rambling off quite a bit. That was just the first part of the video, but at this point I just felt really good. I think at this point I felt better than Showtime, but I would put myself humbly there next to Showtime at like a 6th, maybe even behind him as a 6th slot. So at this point the top 6 in Europe would be the dynamic trio at the front, and then 3 Germans to round it out. And I felt pretty good about myself, and I was looking forward to the next series. What I did afterwards was I took a small break because I felt burnt out before the season finals, because there was quite a bit of a break before the season finals, as I said before. And yeah, and then the next season started, and that's going to be the second chapter in this video.